Hi media students, in this video I'm going to be talking about how to plan a media essay. So in the last video we talked through all the skills that you might want to use inside of your paragraphs, obviously starting with an intro big idea, pushing yourself to think rather than just explaining something, thinking to what extent that thing has had an impact, whether positively or negatively, whether it has been big or small. And Fat Cats on the Mic was a way to sort of remember all of the different skills that you might need to include within your paragraphs. But obviously, this exam, both component 1, I'd say component 2 less so, but obviously there's so much you want to say, are really pushed for time. So it's really important to consider, what am I actually going to be planning? What kind of things should I put into my planning? So it does vary depending on the question, but I would say this is probably my general rule to students about how to plan a media essay. When you're planning a media essay, firstly, take into account what the question is. I normally get people to underline or highlight the key words. The exam would really like it when you repeat those words directly into your answer to show that you are specifically answering the question. So in this case, explain how technology affects how audiences engage with content, refer to the Times. I would be highlighting technology, affects, audiences engaging, and the content. And most importantly, the Times. I've known it in the past for students just to kind of talk about newspapers in general, but try and link it to that set product almost as quickly as you can, giving specific examples. So once you've underlined or highlighted the keywords in the question, the next phase of the planning is to decide your features. I would advise that you decide which parts of the product you want to talk about in reference to that question. So straight away I'm thinking, okay, newspaper industry, how it connects with audiences. I'm thinking about technology, or my knowledge on how that has sort of shifted over time, how the print side of newspapers is declining. So that actually is going to be my first point. I'm going to talk about, in terms of features, the fact that the industry as a print form has been in decline. So rather than just making a generalised industry point, I'm then going to specifically link it to the Times. So one way, obviously, is the fact that you could talk about how the Times have had to adapt their business model. So they now have an online edition, which does have a paywall, which means that you have to subscribe. Now it's only 86p a day, but for some people that will put them off. For example, their other set product, the Daily Mirror, is free to access. So some people would rather get their news for free. If they are paying for a subscription, it implies that it's a premium product, and that's who the Times are aiming at, sort of your ABC1, more affluent, more sort of well-educated audience. So one way that technology affects how audiences engage with content is they've shifted to more of an online model. But interestingly, considering the Times' audience is older, more affluent, and probably does like the tradition of reading a print newspaper. I can think of my granddad going down to buy his newspaper every morning. You might have sort of grandparents that would do the same. It's sort of part of their daily routine. Actually, online subscriptions for the Times have now overtaken print subscriptions for the Times. So the way audiences are engaging with content is starting to shift, and that spans across generations. So that can actually be a bit more of a generational shift. So the second feature I might talk about is how the actual Times website is almost set up to feel in some ways like you're reading the print newspaper. This is what we call synergy, essentially, where there is overlapping connection between media in different forms. So with the website, if you go to the navigation bar, you've got all of the classic kind of sections of the paper newspaper that you would expect to see, but in the online model. So you've got a section for world. If you are affluent, you are more likely to potentially want to know about world affairs. You might be more affected by world affairs. The Times prides itself on kind of targeting business leaders, people interested in the economy, so this will impact them as well. So things to do with world. There's also things to do with business, which I kind of alluded to before. I'm about to spell business with the wrong letters. So in this sense, they're allowing audiences to engage with content through technology in a way that might feel more familiar to them, because ultimately the Times do have that potentially slightly aging audience, so they want them to feel comfortable reading it in a different kind of form through technology. So that's one thing you could talk about, the synergy between those, and we obviously referenced the navigation bar. Now, a third feature that you might want to talk about, and this is depending on the amount of marks in the question and how long you have. So for example, if it was an 8 marker, you might want to talk about these 2 features in lots of detail. If it was more of a 10 or a 12 marker, you might want to add in an additional feature to talk about. So in this case, we can talk about the website and how it has a section for podcasts, because you can, again, talk about the fact that podcasts are a relatively new media form. Radio's been around for a long time, but podcasting is almost sort of catching up to that level. So on the Times website, you actually have really niche podcasts. So feel free to go and have a look yourself. There is one specifically to do with rugby. I think it's called The Ruck. There is one called Wine Times. Again, you can imagine the kind of audience that might sit and listen to a podcast with people talking about wine. So again, thinking about the audience, thinking about how they're engaging with content, and actually thinking about how technology affects that. So in some ways, because of the advancement of technology and the Times having to diversify, which means sort of branch out into different media products, due to that, it actually allows them in some ways to potentially produce more niche content, which again is something you could talk about in your answer. So in terms of our plan, we've decided what the focus is of the question. We've got a couple of features that we're going to talk about. Now, if you look back at the skills to use within a media essay, I'm not necessarily writing down all of these different things in my plan because I just don't have time. But obviously when I'm writing this out, I might include some specifics like it costs 86p a day to subscribe, those sorts of things. So just be really clear about how much you should actually put into a plan versus how much you should just sort of almost have in your head and just leave for when you're writing up your answer. So once you've got your features, I would then suggest for you to think about adding in a theorist. Now obviously we have all of the set theorists who are really, really useful to include, but that doesn't stop you from talking about other theorists that you might have researched or heard about if you think they're useful. One specific, set of theorists that a lot of media teachers, I guess, tell their students about because they're quite useful are Blumler and Katz. So their theory is called uses and gratifications, and I think this is actually quite a nice theory to try and link into this question because it's about audiences engaging with content, and part of the reason why people potentially like the Times so much and want to read it is because it gives them a sense of feeling educated, which is one of the uses and grats that they talk about, and also you could argue it gives them a sense of personal identity. So just to give kind of a short anecdote, I was staying for a weekend away in Salcombe. I don't know if you've ever been there or you've heard of it, but it's like quite a upmarket, nice place to go stay in Devon for a weekend. And the hotel I was staying at was really, really nice. And dotted about everywhere at breakfast, they had the Times free for their clients to read. So it just kind of gave that level of personal identity. You know, they kind of thought about the clients that would be staying at their hotel and thought about the kind of newspaper they might want to read. Think about why they didn't have The Sun, for example, just like dotted around the hotel. Why did they go for the Times? So it's actually really good to think about Blumner and Katz, linking them into these features, and how when audiences are engaging with content, they want to be educated, so you could link it to this feature here, but also they want a sense of personal identity. And actually, by trying to create synergy between the print product and the website, they're getting Times readers to still feel like they are accessing a really high quality product. So we're basically at the final stage of the planning. We've highlighted the keywords in the question, we've thought about how they link to features, we've then linked over to a theorist. The final planning stage, and actually the thing that can get you straight up into the top end of the mark scheme, is to really think about your big idea. And I would actually think that it's more important to get these things written down first, your features and your theory link, before you come up with your big idea, because then you can sort of take a step back and think, how do all of these features link together? What am I going to argue? So I would say there's been a huge amount of technology that the Times have used to try and help their audiences engage with their content. So going back to our sort of rule over here, I'm not just going to explain, I'm going to try and push an argument to essentially be like, how far has that technology had an impact? How far has that technology actually made a difference? So I would say in some ways, although some would argue it's a bit of a loss not to have print newspapers in circulation as much anymore, it has had a positive and large impact on the audiences. So that would be part of my argument. It's had a positive and huge impact on the way that audiences engage with content, because a lot of the content has moved online. They have tried to create some sense of synergy with the print products, but it has also allowed them to potentially produce content that is even more niche for their audiences to enjoy. So what you can see there, hopefully, is that I've taken some bits and pieces from those features and I've built them into what's essentially going to be my argument. If you would like to see the model answer for this, then that will be posted too.